So this video will wrap up this part 3. Like the description said, we're going to ream, tap, and then cut the .06 slots using a vertical bandsaw. Make sure you use the correct size tap drill and always refer to a chart. When I come down and I start drilling, I'll be breaking my chips constantly. You want to avoid getting long stringy chips wrapped up around your drill bit. Now these chips actually, they're kind of breaking away kind of short without even being, without even needing to be broken, but kind of muscle memory kicking in, I guess. If you're going to apply more oil during your drilling operation, make sure your drill bit is completely clear of the work. I see lots of brushes in the shop, and they'll be really short, and that's a good indicator that someone was probably touching the brush to a rotating cutting tool, which is a terrible idea because it can pull the brush into the cut. And then in return, it can also maybe pull you close enough to where your hands or fingers could make contact. Now when you drill holes, parts get warm and hot, so don't forget that. Whenever you're handling a drill bit after you've drilled multiple holes, be very cautious. So since I'm working with a stop, and I think I have a really good setup, I'm not going to do a tool change. I'm going to rotate the part and drill the other hole. I've also deburred the entry and exit to that previous hole off camera, but I would never clamp across the burrs that would be formed from my first drilling operation. So just because you don't see me deburring the parts on film doesn't mean that I haven't done it. And then of course, I mentioned this in the previous video, but at this point I am absolutely using thin parallels because of a 1-inch part, a 3/4 inch reamer, and the standard parallel width of 1/8 of an inch would leave zero clearance. And since my 1-inch part is off the rack stock, it's actually likely slightly smaller than 1 inch. So pay attention to your work. And I probably have slight tension on the quill down feed, and that helps you break through the bottom of your parts when you're drilling with more control. And also when I'm reaming, if I'm not power feeding, then I want to have drag on my spindle quill so I can lower it at a more controlled rate. I just decreased the RPM. The rule of thumb is half of the speed, twice the feed. And that's pretty common. I've heard some slight variances on that, but definitely you slow down the RPM. And you can increase the feed rate because instead of being 2 cutting edges like the drill bit had, there's, probably 10 or more. That's very consistent on the feed rate, watching the spindle go down. So actually it might have been by hand. And then if you are feeding it, power feeding, that's a good idea. You can power feed back out, and then if your reamer has a dull spot, you won't have the swirly marks, but that hole's pretty clean, so I got away with just dragging it out. So here I am, like I said, I'm filing away the burr. I probably should have walked over to the toolbox and grabbed one of the little hand deburring tools that work very well for deburring holes, but my file's right next to me, so that's usually what I use. sure you're using plenty of cutting fluid with your reaming operations and that you have the correct RPM. So for this tapping operation, I decided to go ahead and hand tap. I'm the counter drilled hole pretty much is all the pilot you would need, but I'm also using a tap guide with very light pressure, downward pressure with my right hand on the spindle. And at any point, if you're tapping, if it feels like you've hit a wall or the cutting has stopped, stop turning the tap. It's extremely easy to break these small taps. So it's up to you to determine if you think things are going very well. And I'm using two hands, but I'm using two hands so I can have balanced force, rotational force being applied to the tap. And I have backed off and broke the chip a couple times. I had a really long run in the beginning, several rotations, but now you can see I'm the flutes of the tap are becoming packed with chips, so I'm breaking the chips away more often. And when you're all the way through, the tap turns freely. Now, power tapping can be done. I'm not really recommending it at this point with my students. The small tap, finer thread, smaller thread, I should say. It's really easy to end up with a bad hole, no threads, or a broken tap. So everything's all deburred. Very important, because imagine how hard it would be to deburr this hole with a rotary tool if I split it before I deburr it. So, think ahead. I scribed lines, and to the best of my ability, I'm going to cut down the path of the line. Now, it's okay that this saw blade is not going to leave a perfect .06 wide slot, but it's going to leave a slot, and that's going to allow this to become a clamp, because that's what it is. Now when you break through, you have to really back off on the pressure you're pushing with the part, because otherwise you'll shove the part all the way against the saw blade on the back or the opposite side of the hole. You can't see it, but my wrists are resting on the table surface, and I'm pushing with my fingertips, so I have maximum control. My body's not leaning against the clamp that's holding the part. I'm stable, and I'm pushing with just my fingertips. I'm talking about definitely make sure you deburr this part before you slide it on your other part through the hole. Otherwise, you can scratch the surface. So clean everything up before you get excited and start assembling everything. And just count on needing to run a tap by hand back through that hole. Have a good day.